Today and over the next few sessions, we're going to move from our examination of those individual factors that affected behavior in the workplace, perception, learning, personality, motivation, and start a look at group factors that affect behavior in the workplace. During today's session, we'll deal with some real basics of groups. We'll look at types of groups. We'll look at characteristics of groups. Then we'll start in with the elusive concept of cohesiveness, that attraction that we feel to the groups that we belong to. But first, let's start with trying to get a grip on what makes a group and how many does it take to make a group. If we go to the computer and take a look at the characteristics, it takes at least 2 to make a group. Hard to be a group by yourself unless you've got multiple personalities. So basic of 2, and the 2 people have to interact. And usually interacting over some sustained time in order to make a group, because there are times when you have casual interaction with somebody, but that doesn't make you a group. Another aspect of a group is sharing of common goals. There's something that unites you with other people in the group. And then finally, you have to perceive yourself as being a member of the group. Unless you feel like you're a member, you're not a member of that group. So we're looking at 3 aspects: 2 or more people who interact over some sustained period, common goals, and perception as being a member of the group. In organizations, there are many different types of groups, and we can take a look at some of those different types of groups. First, the formal side of groups. Command groups. These are the groups that are defined by where you are in the organization. The connections between you and people above you, your superior, and people below you, your subordinates. If we switch to the overhead for just a minute on command groups, okay, I've got a somewhat dated organizational chart of a bank, and if you take a look at, I think particularly at the bottom, people who are heading up various different types of groups, Asian Pacific Global Finance, Europe Global Finance, cross-border, private banks. Each of the groups reporting into that person would form a command group. So it's the formal group within the organization, and it is determined by the structure of the organization. Okay, back to the computer. Task groups. These are formal groups, again, within the organization, but your placement on the group doesn't depend on your formal position in the organization, but rather on your expertise and your interests. So task groups are usually formed to accomplish something very specific, and you get onto a task group not because of your hierarchical position, but because of what you bring to the table, what you can contribute to accomplishing that specific task. It might be a marketing group, and you bring something specific in terms of marketing a new product to that group. So another type of group within the organization. And finally, committees. Committees handle problems that are outside regular assignments in the organization. And there are usually standing committees within organizations. And then perhaps as particular problems come up, ad hoc committees get together to handle a specific problem, and it's not going to be an enduring committee. Examples of committees in organizations. In a university, a promotion and tenure committee, a student conduct committee. These are various roles that faculty play outside the regular assignment of teaching and doing research, but filling important needs task needs that come up in the university where faculty should be playing a role. In an organization, a diversity committee might be a standing committee particularly dealing with the issues that need to be met as companies grapple with managing diverse workforces. And we'll get to talking about that a little more through the course of today's session. So various formal groups, but that's not all that's in the organization. We also have informal groups which play a large role. These are the various types of social groups that form up in an organization, and they are comprised of people who just enjoy being with each other. The people that you go to lunch with in the organization. The people who you might in fact see outside the organization. You've become so friendly with them that you spend time talking to them, and you're not going to talk to them just about work-related projects, but you've become social enough and comfortable enough with this group that you'll talk to them about lots of non-work-related issues as well. So the informal social group within an organization. And then finally, the interest groups that form within organizations. If I can make analogies, the social group would be like a chat group, something that you get into, a chat room on a computer. Just socialize with people. And the interest group that forms within an organization would be where people have particular interests that unite them and bring them together. Very often they may be work-related interests. So we've had informal groups arise in the university where people are particularly interested in dealing with instructional issues. We get together and we talk about the various problems that we encounter in the classroom and how we can learn from each other and improve instruction. Another analogy to this, again if we go to the wonderful world of telecommunications, would be interest groups. News groups, listserv members. You join those because it's a particular area of interest to you, and one, you think you have something to contribute to the group, and two, you think you can learn from the group. But these are done on an informal basis. Nobody in the organization tells you to join the group. You find people that you just feel comfortable with, either in terms of, okay, enlarge the computer screen. Okay. Let's see what this does. Nope, I shrunk the computer screen. And now I can't even get back to it. Just move the box. Okay.
You need to hit, you need to move the box, and then you hit the show button down at the bottom.
It's not stretching. Okay. Expert? Somebody want to? Okay. It's an example of learning from your students. Okay. Uh-huh. I hit that, and it didn't.
What you have going on here.
Okay.
That's on, right?
That's what I want.
Okay.
Superb. Thank you, Tony. Okay. So your usual consulting fee on that? Okay, so we're talking about interest groups, okay, and social groups, the informal groups that arise in the organization. And these turn out to be very useful to the organization. It's hard to imagine an organization functioning without its informal groups. It's useful to the organization, as we'll see later, in that the social groups tie people in emotionally to the organization and helps fill the social needs that exist. And the informal interest groups that arise become a way of people learning from each other informally in the organization. It's a way of informally providing resources to each other. And I can't see any way that a formal organization could do this in an organized, systematic way, as well as what happens on an informal basis. They're going to happen anyway. We're just such social animals. We can't stay away from people. So the different types of groups. And if we move to the next one, the next issue that we wish to tackle, characteristics of groups. How do the characteristics of groups affect the functioning of that group? One of the most obvious of the characteristics is that of size. Small groups, large groups. We've all been members of small groups, and we've been members of some very large groups as well. And we know the difference between the two. If we start to pin it down, what is it that smallness does for a group that makes it function in a more efficient type of way? Well, one of the things is that you can't be anonymous in a small group. You can't hide. You have to participate. There's no place for you to go in a small group. And even the most reticent person in a small group can't hide. And the smallness might even make the person who is shy, and many people define themselves as being shy. It's not an unusual way that people have of perceiving of themselves. In the smallness of the group, people don't feel threatened, and so they participate, the most reticent. You have to take on multiple roles in a small group. Again, you have to participate more. You have to do more things in a small group. Well, we can see it could have a disadvantage because you never get to specialize. On the other hand, you have to be more active. It's much easier to communicate in a small group. You can make yourself heard. There's more time for you to be heard in a small group. So communications flow more easily. There are fewer barriers to communications. Another reason that they function well. And in the end, because of the increased activity, participation, communication, we usually identify more with small groups and feel more committed to the small groups. Again, no place to hide. They're counting on you. And there's nobody else to count on. So you have to be active in the small group. So we see a lot of advantages in how it helps functioning. And yet, in the work organization, most things seem to be large groups. And the way things are going today in terms of management, managers are managing larger and larger and larger groups. What do you get out of the large group that you don't get out of the small group? You get a chance to specialize. You get a chance to become experienced and proficient in a particular area. And this is typically what you want in an organization is a specialized type of proficiency. We don't need, in specific areas, generalists. We need generalists up at the top. But it takes more than chiefs to run an organization, and so we need the specialists throughout the organization. You get that with size. It allows you to do that. You have resources. But you run some risks with size and things that you need to attend to. You run the risks of having problems of coordinating people. Have you ever been a member of some kind of student project team? 3 people you can coordinate. When it gets to 5 and 6 and 7, try finding a common time when anybody can get together. It becomes really difficult. And so you spend, as we often find in committees or task forces, more so in committees though, more time on the issue of when can we hold the next meeting than when can we really come to grapple with the substance of the problem for which the committee was formed. Coordination, a problem. Communication as groups get larger becomes a problem. It becomes easier to hide in the big group. And if you're not given to talking, then you'll be one of those who will begin to fall back and you let others assume the responsibility for talking. Some people seem to have the gift of gab, and they're happiest when they are talking in a group. But you have something important to communicate. And the person who has that gift of gab may be going down the wrong track and may not have the information. But you hold back. And others who are reticent like you hold back, and you begin to think, well, maybe this person does know something. Interesting. Last Tuesday evening, in a group on organizational development, we tried one of the typical team development activities in decision making, and that was ranking as an individual some objects that were needed in wilderness survival and then ranking as a group. And except for one group, invariably, the averaged individual rankings were better than the group rankings. What does it say? It says that there was knowledge in the group, but it didn't come out. And why did the group acquiesce to another individual in the group? And why did they form consensus around positions that they didn't initially agree with? It's just that it was the most talkative person in the group who seemed to be the most persuasive. And good knowledge was lost. And so you run that kind of risk as groups grow larger. It's not that the knowledge isn't in the group. It's just that it's getting submerged and suppressed. You also run the risk of feelings of alienation and low morale. You feel better when you do contribute to the group. And when you don't contribute, you begin to feel as if you're on the periphery and not a member. And so those things happen as well. And so the challenge in today's management for managing a large workforce is somehow keeping your employees and your subordinates attached and attracted and on the goal and focusing on what needs to be done. And one of the most important things, contributing their knowledge, drawing them out, and not letting them fall to the periphery while a few people become the most active in the central core of the group. That's a difficult task as a manager, and something that it's easy to fall back and let the central core become active. And you have to constantly be vigilant about your own behavior to make sure that others are getting into the group. So size, see how that affects. Composition. Homogeneous groups, heterogeneous groups. Homogeneous groups, members appear to be similar to each other. Heterogeneous groups, members seem to have few qualities in common. And we hear a lot these days about workforce diversity. When we talk about workforce diversity, we are invariably talking about differences in ethnic, racial characteristics, as well as gender, male, female, and how this is affecting the workforce. And as the demographics of the US change, so change the demographics of the workforce. And as lifestyle changes, and we've been through that already, women are far more prevalent in the workforce than they ever were, and there are more women in higher education these days than men. It has tipped more women in college than men, which says more women available for higher level positions, really skilled positions out there, and women rising to the top. So it says then that we have to manage people who are going to be different from us. But there are other ways to define diversity as well, and that has to do with careers that come into meetings. You have a very diverse work group when you bring together people from finance and people from engineering. In fact, they speak different languages. And you need to know how to manage that and get people speaking in a common language as well. So we need to think of diversity along a lot of paths, and not just the typical demographic paths as well, so that we can get all people contributing to groups. How does diversity affect performance? There's a reason why I mentioned finance and engineering and speaking different languages. When you're with people who are similar to you, you have the advantage of being able to take shortcuts in communication, and everybody understands you. When you work with a heterogeneous group, you can't take those shortcuts in communication because people may not understand you. And the communication can be verbal and nonverbal. Again, with people who are like you, you've worked out nonverbal cues. You can, like on a baseball team, pass signals between the two of you, and you know what you're talking about. Heterogeneous, those signals aren't going to work. And so initially, heterogeneous groups have more trouble performing because they've got to get to the common language base. They've got to get across the communication problems. And again, the role of the manager in getting past those, in understanding that people are going to be communicating in different ways, and keep finding a common basis for communication. But ultimately, heterogeneous groups perform as well as, or better, than groups that are homogeneous. And figure that heterogeneous is the way things are going to happen, so you need to work on managing the diversity of those groups. A common assumption with diverse groups is that they're going to bring more resources, more perspectives to the table. And in that way, there will be a richer discussion about the issues that are going on. However, again, remember what we talked about before, particularly in large groups, that richness of resources, of ideas, of creativity is only realized if everybody contributes. And so, as a manager, again, you've got to find a way to draw people out and get people contributing in groups where they might not feel so comfortable and where you are identified as the leader, and you might feel comfortable calling on people who are like you and asking people who are like you to help you out on things. You need to fight that tendency in yourself and reach out to others as well. Include them in the network. Spin, if you will, the web of inclusion in terms of making heterogeneous groups work. And finally, status. How does status play itself out in groups? Status is the social prestige that we give to members. And clearly, we recognize people who are of higher status and lower status. Status, either way. In an organization, there are groups which are more prestigeful, those that are at the top, those that have control of certain important resources, and there are groups which seem to be less prestigeful. And there are individuals that are more prestigeful and those that are less. Again, it makes a difference in the functioning of the group. Those with more prestige are listened to more than those with less prestige. Those with more prestige have access to more resources than those with less prestige in the organization. So the status of a group matters. What becomes interesting is when you put together the task force and when you put together the committee, you usually cut across hierarchies of organizations, and now you're going to bring together people with different levels of status in the organization. How do those groups interact? And is there a tendency in groups to defer to the person who comes in with the most titles attached and the most prestige attached? And the answer is, yeah, there is a tendency to do that. And there is a tendency to probably see that person as naturally being the leader of the group. If the group is going to function well, and remember, a task force is put together not because of where you are in the organization and your status, but it's put together because of your expertise, your knowledge, your skills, and your experience. Okay, if that's going to function, you're going to have to, again, fight the tendencies that seem to be inherent to defer to status and get everybody contributing to the group, so that not only the people with the highest prestige are listened to, but people who are lower down are listened to as well. One interesting example where a lot of research was done, flight crews, particularly in the cockpit. Who has the most status in the cockpit? The pilot. And when sessions were done in simulation of taping the pilot's decision over, I guess, the co-pilot and the engineer, there was deference to the pilot, even when the pilot was wrong. So we have another aspect, too, in that as the person in the group with the most prestige not only is listened to the most, but has a tendency not to listen. Another thing that you have to work against if you're going to get a task force and a committee operating, and even if you're going to have what you call a command group operating in the best possible way, you need to draw on the resources of those that are in the group. Look what we had to do today. I didn't know immediately how to expand the screen. Okay, I could have stayed trying to fiddle around with it for 3, 4, 5 minutes. We would have lost important time. So we need to, in situations, draw upon those who have the knowledge in the group. Which brings us to what it is we get out of groups. People are clearly attracted to groups. We are very social animals. We love being with other people. Let's talk for a minute about some groups that you're members of and what it is that attracts you to the group and what you think you get from it. Before class started, I was talking to a few people. John, you said you're a member of a fraternity, and I asked you, why? What is it you derive from it? What benefits?
It's different for, everyone has their own image of what they get from the fraternity, but for me, I'd say the leadership skills that I've learned in terms of decision making, goal setting, how to interact with people, get them to see your side of things.
Okay, so clearly you see it in a way as being instrumental in helping you reach goals that you're going to want to reach once you get out of school and into the workplace. Let's probe for a minute the social side of things, because no one can deny that fraternities are social places as well. Okay, people get together. They seem to enjoy each other's company. You feel at home when you're in the fraternity?
Oh, definitely. They're all my brothers there. I'm
okay.
completely comfortable.
So you have a sense of comfort and ease, security, if you will, in terms of being with the group. You identify yourself as a member of the group?
Yes.
Okay, so groups give us a sense of reference, a way of identifying ourselves as well. Is there any added prestige to belonging to that group as opposed to not belonging?
Oh, I definitely say so.
Okay, so as you go around, you can, at least you feel that it adds something to your credentials by saying you're a member of whatever fraternity you're a member of. Okay. Again, exploring the social aspect of groups. Computers, telecommunications, wonderful things. You can go into various chat rooms and spend time. Spend a lot of time. And there are people who get hooked up on chat rooms. They have this appealing, seductive aspect to them. You forget how much time goes by as you're quickly typing in your responses, and people are giving responses back. Patty, you said before that you had ventured onto the computer into a chat room.
But I don't spend that much time.
But you don't spend that much time, right? Not like my son.
I'm a member of a parenting support group.
Mm-hmm. And when you're online, what benefits do you think you get out of it?
I receive both social and emotional needs through the interaction with others that have the similar situations that I do.
There's a comfort in knowing that other people are going through similar problems that you're going through. In a sense, it affirms who we are, that we're not alone out there. Again, very social animals. Being alone is punishment. I'm not talking about being alone for a few minutes or for even a day or something like that. But think of the term solitary confinement. It's punishment being alone. We crave human contact. We seek it out in all kinds of ways. John, you were involved with the Air Force ROTC?
Yes, I was.
Oh, you was. Okay.
No, I am.
You are. You're still a member of that. Mm-hmm. What benefits do you see that you derive from being a member of that group?
Well, the big benefit is you get a job as soon as you graduate, I guess, to become a second lieutenant in the Air Force.
Okay. So it's, again, something instrumental to a goal that you want. Instant job coming out, something that a lot of people wish they knew they were going to have as soon as they graduated.
Right.
Your colleagues, you feel comfortable being around them?
Yep.
Okay. Again, more comfortable than you would in a group of strangers. Okay. And it's that sense of ease that we have of being with people we know. So if we begin to look at what groups do for us, basically they fill one of two types of needs. Social needs, and we'll go through that and elaborate. We've already done some of it, but we'll do it a little more systematically. And instrumental needs, needs that we need to fulfill to get towards some goal that we have, goal-oriented needs. First, I think social needs, because they are so obvious. One is, it fills, I think, a need that we all have for social affirmation, acceptance. We all want to be accepted. The opposite of acceptance is rejection. That feels bad. Anytime anyone's had a rejection, whether it's interpersonal in terms of a relationship, whether it's been more professional in terms of an idea or being rejected from a job, we know how it feels. Acceptance feels a whole lot better than rejection. We don't like that feeling because that leaves us with a sense that we're not as qualified as we thought we were in a whole range of areas, either interpersonal or professional. Doesn't feel good. So social affirmation, that feeling of acceptance, of recognition, and of people willing to pay attention to us. They laugh at our jokes. They pat us on the back. They celebrate our good times, and they hold our hands through the bad times. We need that, and we crave that. That's social affirmation, and that's what we get out of being a member of a group. It's no fun having something wonderful happen to you and have nobody to tell it to. You need to share that stuff. Another thing is the recognition that we get from groups. Important to us. Our place in the sun, if you will. So groups give us some kind of recognition. They give us security, safety in numbers. Other people feel the same way that we do. Other people think the same way that we do. That's security. That means that we're not alone in the way we're thinking, and maybe we're right in the way we're thinking. That gives us a secure feeling. We're not likely to go against whatever the conventions are of the group are, because then we stick out. We call attention to ourselves, and we don't feel so secure when we have a sense that the spotlight is on us. Insecure, not comfortable, easier holding back and being a member of the group. Security. And another thing that I put with security is identity. Groups give us, again, a sense of belonging, a way of defining ourselves. We define ourselves in part by the various groups that we belong to. Sometimes the identification becomes so strong that we wear the labels on ourselves. I can't resist doing this. Can we put the camera on John? He's got his NJIT t-shirt on today. There he is, his label. But people do, even after they graduate, and we'll see how prestige flows into this, wear the colors of their schools, old school ties, if you will. Or people wear some other indicators of groups that they belong to, jackets with names on the back. A way of letting people know we are a member of a group, identity, security. And finally, some prestige accrues to us from being members of a group as well. We feel as if we're more important, as if we have more status being a member of that group than not being a member. Because the group's accomplishments spill over onto us. We're a member of a group. Whatever that group accomplishes, that's me too. I'm part of it. That's why on college campuses, there is such a good level when the football team is winning, or whatever team is winning, because that's one of the routes to getting attention out there, and everybody feels really good about that. Or that's why in organizations, when a new product is launched successfully, everybody feels wonderful about that. When Boeing launched its latest airplane, which I believe is, I want to say the 767, but it might be the 777. I think it's 770, thank you, 777. There was a real sense of camaraderie and teamwork about the launch of that product because it was designed very differently from day one than any other Boeing airplane had been designed. The people from United who were contracting to buy the planes had a say in the design. The pilots had a say in it, the maintenance people had a say in it. It was designed with the user in mind from day one, and when they finally rolled that off and it was ready, and it succeeded, there were far fewer complaints than there had been before on other airplanes. People were the United pilots, maintenance people, were far more satisfied with it than previously had been the case. There was toasting and champagne going around for everybody. Sense of prestige that you get from being a member of an organization, particularly a winning organization. So we can see, and finally, the instrumental function. We can't overlook that. We have all of these social things, but most of the things we want to accomplish in life, we're going to have to accomplish through groups. The goals, our career goals, are going to be realized through groups and not on our own. Flying solo is difficult, and you're still going to need to rely on groups to help you get to where you want to go anyway. So we had two instances here, John and John, who both talked about what they realize in terms of career goals from being members of the groups that we're in. So that we can't overlook either. An important aspect of the group is cohesiveness. That mutual attraction that members have for each other. And a somewhat elusive concept. Again, one of those things, we know when we're members of cohesive groups, we know when we're members of groups that lack in cohesion. You want to be a member of a cohesive group, you don't care about the non-cohesive one. So it's the glue that can hold a group together. The stronger the glue, so much the better for the group. How do we get cohesiveness in a group? What is it that leads to and builds cohesiveness? Member similarity. It's that communication factor. The more people feel similar to each other, the easier it is for them to feel that glue that holds the group together. And member similarity does not have to be ethnic, cultural, gender, racial similarity. It can be a similarity of purpose. It can be a similarity of interest. It can be a similarity of values. Those are even more important in terms of holding the group together, because ultimately that's what the group's purpose is about. So member similarity leads to it. Group size, we've already mentioned that. The larger the group is, the more difficult it's going to be for people to communicate and achieve recognition and achieve all that social affirmation that we had discussed earlier. And so size becomes an important factor. Too small, and there's not much of a group. Too large, and a few people feel as if they're the core of the group, and as if they're attracted to the group, but then you have to deal with everybody else who feels as if he or she's on the periphery. So, not too large a group. High entrance standards becomes important. Somehow success got to the wrong position there. High entrance standards. It's like severity of initiation. The more difficult it is to get into the group, the more attracted you are to the group. And more the sense of prestige and accomplishment by being admitted into a group. Fraternities know just what they're doing in the pledge period and in the initiation rituals that bring members into a group. Because by the time they finish with that initiation ritual, the member feels absolutely bonded to everybody else. Well, we can't exactly do that in a workplace. We don't have quite the range of freedom to do some of the things that are necessary, perhaps, to get that kind of group feeling. But certainly organizations that make you believe that they've set high entrance standards are organizations where you feel a closer relationship to people. And let's skip to the last one, shared success. Somehow slipped over into the wrong position. Nothing succeeds like success in giving a group feelings of cohesiveness. People want to be members of that. They want to identify with the winning team. It gives recognition. It gives you reason for identity. It gives prestige. It gives you lots of reinforcement being a member of that team. You think that you will somehow maybe garner more attention. People will notice you more if you can identify as being a member of a winning team. I'm going to come back to that again, but I want to highlight that right now. Competition pulls people together, makes you focus on the goal, makes you forget about all of those distracting things in which you feel different when you have to compete. So competition leads to a sense of cohesiveness. And interestingly, isolation. First of all, in terms of interaction in groups, it's easier to interact with people who are close to you physically, proximity, than people who are far away. It's hard to keep friendships going over long distances, and you notice that people who you were friendly with in high school thought you were never going to lose their friendship and, you know, like friends forever. And a few years later, no contact. Groups that are more isolated, that do draw up barriers around them, are groups that have more cohesiveness. So where you have boundary lines drawn, where you feel as if you are a member of the group and you know when you step over it, and you go out. And there's some penalty to pay for stepping outside the boundaries of the group. That leads to cohesiveness. The best examples that I can give you of isolation, apart from physical isolation of people, which will draw them together, people who are held hostage are isolated and they surely bond together with each other. But there are religious groups as well, which draw up boundaries and barriers for themselves. And that creates cohesiveness within the group. We can look at the Amish, if you will, as an example of that. Their rituals, their ways of living create boundary lines and isolation of the group. Yes, there's contact and commerce with the rest of the society, but there's also voluntary isolation, if you will, if you choose to stay in that group. And so you can see how that can create cohesiveness. What then are some of the outcomes of cohesiveness if we look at some of the causes of it. We have to look at it in two ways. In terms of where the group goals support the organization and where the group goals might undermine the organization, because you can have cohesive groups in either situation. Let's work with the side that's more intuitive, where the group goals support the organization. What happens when their group is cohesive? Well, within that group, we know that there's going to be increased activity and communication, so that important information, knowledge, resources will spread more rapidly through that group. You can get information to people who you need to more easily. People aren't going to hold back. They're not going to be reluctant to call or walk over to somebody, get the information out. There's more conformity to the norms of the group. This is good because the norms are going to support the organization, and we can think of then a strong work ethic. Good, everybody comes in early and everybody stays till the job gets done, and we all help each other out here. And if you're particularly burdened, I'm going to come in and pitch in and help you accomplish your job. If you need information, don't ever hesitate to come to me. Okay? The norms of the organization, people will conform to those norms, and they're supportive in terms of dealing with the organizational core tasks. Goal achievement. It's going to be a group that wants to achieve the goals, wants to succeed. And the organization goals will be the group goals. They're going to work at them. They're going to work at problem solving until they get it, and they're going to work at getting out quality products, because the product reflects the organization, and the organization gives members identity. All of this works very well, cohesiveness. And member satisfaction. It's like, thank God it's Monday. Can't wait to get to work. I like my work group. And some people feel that way about the work group. We tell stories from Redwood, Washington, where Microsoft is, of people who stay overnight in their offices because they can't pull themselves away from the problems that they're working on. That goal-oriented, that caught up in the work, that challenging. So that's the side where goals support the organization. But sometimes the group goals undermine the organization. High cohesiveness, but the goals now undermine the organization. Whatever am I talking about? How could this happen in an organization? Well, sometimes you have groups that arise in organizations that become interested in only meeting their own goals and not the goals of the rest of the organization. They become self-absorbed in getting whatever it is they want out of it. We heard stories a year ago, 2 years ago, of rogue cops in New York City, of groups that were out to enrich themselves and not take care of the main job. It was a group in which there was a lot of camaraderie, but they were subverting and undermining the goals of the organization. So in that case, the communication is going to detract from work. People will spend time talking. They love their work group, but they're not going to talk about work-related things. They may actually engage in things. It may be that it's just a strong social bond, and work gets neglected. Who did you pick for the football pool? And let's spend half an hour discussing that. That's the benign, the most benign aspect of it, to areas where groups are engaged within the organization of actually subverting the purposes of the organization and turning it to their own purposes, stealing from the organization. Conformity can restrict productivity. Don't work too hard. You're going to make us all look bad. And the rest of us don't want to have to work harder or faster. I mean, the boss thinks we work hard here. Don't ruin a good thing that we have going. Okay, and by the way, we all manage during the day to take off and do other things and then come back on the job. So, cohesiveness in the group, but the goals of the organization are not being met. Okay, so the goals support the group at the expense of the organization. High cohesiveness, but you're not getting performance out of that group. That's dangerous when that happens in an organization. And you have to watch out for things like that because it detracts from getting the organization's work done. I'm reminded of a strike that took place about a year ago. I believe it was American Airlines. Well, it was actually the strike that never took place because President Clinton called it off before it ever really got a chance to get going. But there was a group of pilots there that really pushed the strike vote on it. It was a group of pilots that worked out of Miami. And if we looked at all of the things that we talk about, they were kind of isolated on the routes that they flew from a lot of the other pilots. They used email to communicate a lot with each other. And they were a group that became very dissatisfied about a lot of things, and they persisted until they got other pilots to agree with them. Well, from the organization's point of view, that was working at the expense of the organization. From the union's point of view, there were benefits that were brought to the group, so it depends which side you're looking at. There we have an example within an organization of a group that formed whose goals were not the same as the organization's. Ultimately, things did work out there. How do you build cohesiveness in groups, and what are some of the disadvantages of cohesiveness? Well, lack of cohesiveness, we can see, would lead to lack of that glue, lack of feelings of satisfaction, lack of activity. But there are some disadvantages to cohesiveness if taken out to the extreme. And that is where groups are very cohesive and committed to the organization, it's going to be difficult to change a course of action, even when it's the wrong course of action. Because people have put so much into it and there's so much commitment there, they're not going to be able to reverse course or just throw the whole thing out altogether. That becomes difficult. And socialization can always detract from being productive. The group that just chit-chats too much, organization, the term for it is time theft. And the thing we mentioned before, where groups become so tight, there's such cliques there, that the group goals, whatever they are, now replace the organizational goals. So too much cohesiveness may not be beneficial for the organization. Moderate levels of it, where the group's enforcement of norms is not so strong that you're killing individuality, you're killing the ability to say something contrary to the way things are moving, even though it's important to say that. Moderate levels of cohesiveness. Can you turn a group around that's suffering from low cohesiveness? Can you move in? This is the typical job of the coach that comes into the losing team. How are you going to pick up the pieces and bring that together? Or a new manager comes into an organization that is so demoralized. Product is going well, product is going poorly, lots of product failure, people aren't contributing, lots of absenteeism and turnover. And it's like turning an organization around, turning a team around. Well, you'll more likely have to turn a team around before you have to turn an organization around. And can you do this? I mentioned success when we were talking about causes, and I want to come back to success, because building a record of success is probably the best of ways to lead to a sense of cohesiveness. In fact, we usually think about, well, we need to have a cohesive team in order to be productive. Wrong. You need to have a productive team in order to be cohesive. Analysis of lots of studies of productivity and cohesiveness have indicated that productivity more leads to cohesiveness than cohesiveness leads to productivity. Interviews with Super Bowl teams show that even when they scatter and they're on different teams, that wonderful feeling of being together and winning the Super Bowl was so powerful, was such an emotionally charged time, that they still spend a lot of time calling each other up, reliving the moment of glory. So success, productivity as the way to build cohesiveness. And how do you start with a group that's way down? Building on small bits of success, giving them a sense of self-efficacy, if you will, a perception that they can do it, and focusing on the fact that they can do it, and giving them some affirmation and small challenges, and incrementally building on that and building up. Yes, there's setbacks. There's a lot of hard work. But then they begin to see payoffs as a team for the work that they're doing. So incrementally building the record of success and getting some recognition for the success, even externally, so the team begins to believe that they are successful. Self-efficacy. Building the vision. Get that goal orientation out there. Let people know where you want them to be. And buying into the vision. This is an important goal. This is where we want to go as an organization. Whether it be a product, a particular product, or market share, if you're talking about that, or quality, or customer satisfaction, indicators of where you want to go with the group, and ultimately how each member can contribute to the group so that people feel that sense of participation, some ownership in whatever the vision is. Building a sense of team feeling, sometimes called esprit de corps. How do you go about building a sense of team feeling in a group that's feeling low? Maybe uniforms sometimes help in a way of doing it. But you need to do something to pump up the team. Take them out for pizza, who knows? A way of building team feeling. You can do it maybe by creating the competitive edge. Focus on the competition. We have to beat the competition out there. You know what the competition is in terms of product, or the competition can be what you were a year ago. We need to build that. Compete against yourselves. We need to improve on where we were. But get people feeling competitive about things. And if you need to, if it works, sometimes you take the group on a retreat. That sense of isolation is a way of building the team feeling. So yes, you can turn a team around, but it takes active work on all of these things. So, quickly, I lost it. Forget it. I went backwards. Summing up, forget that. We've been looking at types of groups, functions of groups, and taking a look at cohesiveness. Next time, we're going to explore two very important issues on groups. Group norms. Why do we follow all those rules? And roles, specialized positions within groups. Who takes what roles and why? Next time.